Having already looked at the principle of non-maleficence briefly, we now turn to a second moral principle relevant to end-of-life decisions, the principle of beneficence. Let me remind you again that we are saying about these principles that they apply to all people and to all people equally. They are universalizable. They are prima facie. They point to always relevant moral considerations, but they are not absolute. They can be overridden. And we will be using these principles, of course, to analyze cases about end-of-life care.
The principle of beneficence requires us to do good. That is to say, to act in ways that make people better off, in ways that promotes people's welfare or interests. It is generally thought to have three distinguishable aspects. First, beneficence points to our obligation to act to protect people from harm or injury when it's about to happen. But it also requires us to act to remove or relieve harms or injuries that people have already suffered. Most broadly of all, it requires us to act in ways that promote human welfare. It's important to recognize that beneficence is a positive principle. That is to say, it requires us to do something. It requires us to act on behalf of others. That's by way of contrast with the principle of non-maleficence, which is negative, as we have seen. Non-maleficence tells us what we may not do. We may not act in ways that harm other people, and we fulfill that obligation when we do nothing. But beneficence is not fulfilled by doing nothing. When we intervene to protect someone from attack, that's an act consistent with the principle of beneficence. In the healthcare context, think of all that we do to protect people from illness or injury. Think of immunizations or inoculations as a beneficent action. When injury or harm has already occurred, the principle of beneficence points to our obligation to relieve that suffering, to address that injury. And of course, this is often the case in the healthcare context. We are responding to people's illnesses, responding to their injuries with the help that they need. Finally, of course, any action that promotes people's full welfare or flourishing is consistent with the principle of beneficence. Here you see people working in a soup kitchen, responding to the immediate needs of people in hunger. Social welfare programs administered by the government to address human need might be considered obligations to which the principle of beneficence points. And of course, we've heard much talk about healthcare reform, all of which involves public policy efforts to make our healthcare system better address and more efficiently address the needs of the people of the United States. All of this could be considered an expression of those obligations to which the principle of beneficence points. And please notice this quotation from Post and Bluestein in relation to the principle of beneficence. They write that the principle of beneficence, quote, underlies the obligations to provide the best care for the patient and balance the risks and burdens of care against the benefits. Promoted goods typically include prolonging life, restoring function, relieving pain and suffering, and preventing harm, unquote. They go on to add that this principle has, quote, arguably the greatest resonance for caregivers whose traditional mission is to heal and comfort, and notions of nurturing and protecting are reflected in heightened care for those who are most vulnerable, unquote. Clearly then, the entire practice of healthcare, of the health professions, is grounded in this fundamental obligation to promote people's welfare, to protect them from harm, to relieve their injuries and suffering.